99.8 KCFM podcast.
Brian Horton, good evening.
Good evening.
Did you enjoy that? You had a nice big smile on your face.
Yeah, it's always nice when somebody heaps a bit of praise on you. Yeah, thanks for that.
It's an unusual position that you're in, though, isn't it? 20 years after being manager to come back as assistant manager. I very much doubt that's happened before, anywhere.
Yeah, a lot of people have said to me since it happened and since we got promotion that it was quite a brave decision for Phil Brown to make. You know, that, obviously I was still quite popular in the city and had great times, and sometimes, people are frightened of bringing someone back that's been popular, So, I mean, I always loved the place and enjoyed my 5 years, or 4.5 years, whatever it was, to a massive degree. So, for me to come back and a lot of people put it in saying unfinished business, because that's how it felt a little bit, because we were close. We're close to building a very, very good side, and not just the team, the club. The youth policy was good, the reserves were in the top division, and the whole thing was going well. But, that's football for you.
You said people have said it was a brave decision by Phil Brown. Given that you'd been a manager for 20 years prior to that, you had a spell as an assistant manager at Oxford, of course, although that didn't last very long. You soon became manager there. Was it a brave decision for you to take, to come back as an assistant rather than for the top job?
Yes and no. It happened because just about probably 13 months ago, I saw Phil at a dinner at Hull City for the ex-Tigers. Jeff Barnby had done, and I came up with my wife, and I went over and had a chat with Phil and Steve Parkin, and Phil said that was the first time that he'd interviewed me without me knowing, So it was quite bizarre, really, knowing that, because sometimes you don't realise what you've said. And then I bumped into him again at another football dinner in Manchester, and he actually put it to me, would I ever consider being a number two to a manager that needed an experienced guy with him? And I said, well, I hadn't thought about it, and he hadn't got the job then. I mean, he'd just about kept Hull up in the Championship, and then when he got the job, he rang me again.
Yeah, it was in the midst of all the takeover stuff,
absolutely,
wasn't it?
Yeah. So then I got a phone call saying, would you come for, not so much an interview, because it was just more of a chat about, what we did and what we liked and football things, and we just got on great. We just clicked, and he said he'd interviewed, quite a few people, experienced people, so I didn't know if I'd got it or not. And then he rang me one night to say, come up, I'd like you to be number two and come and sort your contract out. So it went from there, and no one can really see how well it was going to go. I mean, what he said, we couldn't have another relegation battle. That was and then obviously the takeover, and they were saying halfway and build 3-year plan and everything. So, and obviously the rest, went on and on.
How's the preparations for the Premier League going? What's the state right now?
The phone is absolutely red hot. I mean, I've had my holidays, Phil's having his now, and we're just in constant contact, and with the chairman as well. So it's almost three-way conversations at the moment. But it's the time of the season where supporters are wanting names and what have you, and we're trying our best to give them names. But you deal with agents more than you deal with players and chairman and managers of football clubs now. So it is frustrating. It's frustrating us, but we are making inroads, and we are really trying. But it's got to be the right players. It's got to be players that we know can play at the top level, and to allied to the players that we've got, because I believe some of the players that we've got can play in the Premier League without a shadow of a doubt.
No, I think there's no doubt about that. I certainly think there's a spine in that squad of last season that can play in the Premier League. We remember you. Let's go back then, because that's why, for the most part, you're here to look back at your time as manager. And we remember you at Brighton and then at Luton as a player. Was it always your plan to go straight into management when your time was up at Kenilworth Road?
Well, I wanted to go into management or coaching. After I had my second year, I'd had lots of offers because my contract was up the day we won at Man City to stay in the top flight, and my contract was up, and I had lots of offers to go to other places, and then David Pleat talked me into having one more year at the top flight, and didn't take much talking into, because to stay at the top flight and be in the top flight is the only place to play. But then the decision was made by David and myself that the time had come for me to go into coaching or management, and he helped me, and he recommended me apparently with Jack Charlton, with Emily Hughes, to Don Robinson, and I just got a phone call left on an answer machine whilst I was on holiday, and I came back to about 10 messages, all offering me player coaches, player managers jobs, and the big one I turned down, and obviously it was the right decision because I had such a good time, and my football career has blossomed, to have over 1,000 games, but the one that really took some turning down was player manager at Wolves, because Wolves was my schoolboy team that I would have loved to put on that shirt, you know, and that was to go as player coach with Tommy Docherty. And so I sort of dwindled all the others away and down, and then, as I say, I had a phone call from Don Robinson to say, you know, would you like to be manager of Hull City? You know, if you want to talk, 10:30 at the Queen's Hotel in Leeds in the morning. And it was happening this quick, you know, so I went up, I met him, I had a cup of tea, cup of coffee, whatever, and within 2 minutes he said, job's yours, that's what I'll pay you. I said, well, that's probably half of what I get at Luton as a player. And he went, well, that's the offer, take it or leave it, I want you to come, I think you'll be good, and so I chose to take it, and, you know, I mean, it was just that quick, it happened that quick.
Did you find, given that the club, the team under Colin Appleton the previous year had missed out on promotion by 1 goal. It was as close as that, of course. 1 goal, and they'd nearly got it. They'd won 2-0 on the last day at Burnley. They knew all the other results because their game had been delayed because of the weather.
That's right.
And they knew they needed 1 more goal and would have gone up. So when you took over, did you find a bunch of players who felt down on their luck from the previous season, having missed promotion by 1 goal, or were they actually quite upbeat?
They were very upbeat because I met them in America.
Yes, of course.
I was
going to bring that up, yes.
I flew out to Tampa, and that was Don's idea because he'd given me the job, and he tried to keep it quiet from them. Dennis was in charge, and they'd played Fort Lauderdale, and I flew into Tampa and met them. So
yeah, Gareth Roberts and Peter Skipper and a couple of Billy Whitehurst have all said on this programme, the first time we met the new gaffer, we were all drinking lager in America.
I think Billy had just come off the beach, and he had his 6-pack, and a few of them were around the pool having a drink. But we met.
Was that his chest or his cans of beer?
He's a fit lad, Billy. He liked to drink, and I like to drink, and why not? But he was a great player. But that was the first time I met them out in Tampa. Dennis was in charge when we played Tampa Bay, and I only saw the film of the game a few weeks back. I hadn't seen the DVD of the trip, you know, so it was a fantastic trip, and I met them, and I came back early and set all the pre-season up, obviously, and it went great because we had a good pre-season, led us into the games, and we had a good start.
What about stamping authority straight away? Because you were player manager, so you were of their generation as a player, and you had, you know, characters. You had Skipper, Whitehurst, McEwen there. Was it hard to stamp any authority, or did they take to you as gaffer straight away?
Oh no, they did. I mean, I think you earn respect, and I think the training was good. I had Chris Chilton and Dennis Booth with me. The training was good. But it's all about winning, and we started off on a winning note. In fact, I played in the first game at Lincoln. We drew 0-0. Colin Murphy was in charge, and then we had to go back there and at Coca-Cola. And I tweaked my thigh in the game at Lincoln in the league game. We had to go back to Lincoln in the cup game. So I put Dennis Booth in to do the holding midfield role that I didn't. I think we won 2-0. Yep. So Dennis said to me, "You can't leave me out Saturday. We're playing Bournemouth at home." Harry Redknapp was manager.
You did, though. You put him on the bench.
I left him out and put Michael Ring in, who scored a wonderful 30-yard shot, if you remember.
Yes.
Did we beat them 3-0?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've got it in front of me. Yeah, so Whitehurst, Steve Massey and Mike Ring with the goals.
So we had a clean sheet in my debut, then Dennis 2-0. Was it 2-0, the Lincoln game?
It was, yeah. You didn't concede a goal until... oh, my goodness me, when did you first concede a goal? It was Preston, a home defeat to Preston, a 2-1 home defeat, and that was the 4th league game of the season. And that was your first concession of a goal.
Well, changed the system slightly because I became the holding midfield player, and we had some good players, you know, Steve McLaren, Gareth Roberts, Billy Askew, Billy Whitehurst.
Well, this is the point. It's rare that a new manager inherits a good squad. Normally, it's a squad that's been relegated or had a bad year, down on its luck, and it needs some serious sort of reworking, reshaping. But you made one great signing midway through the season in Richard Jobson, but of course, I still think it's probably your most significant buy in that 4 years that you had. But other than that, you had Colin Appleton's players, and you quite happily took them on.
Yeah, well, I bought Michael Ring in, who did a good job, and Neil Williams. I took those two on free transfers, and myself on a free, so I didn't spend a penny that summer. So Don Robinson liked that fact, obviously, as chairman do. But we had a good season, and there were some good players, and I mean, I was one of the players. I used to, you know, we'd go out together, and not all the time, but we'd mix together and socialise together, and there was a very, very good spirit amongst the players.
Talk about Richard Jobson. He came in midway through that first season, initially as a full-back, moved eventually to centre-back a couple of years later. As I just said, I think it's probably the most significant signing you made, and up until Michael Turner's blossoming of the last sort of 18 months, he's still the best defender I've ever seen in a Hull City shirt. That's how good he was.
Yeah, he was an outstanding player. He was at the game at Wembley a few weeks back with his wife, and I actually said to us he was one of the worst signings I ever made. You know, just to bring him down again, Joe. But he was a tall, good-looking, you know, elegant player, wasn't he? He could play. I played him right wing back sometimes when we played a sweeper system, but he scored goals from there. But his centre half, I think, was his best position. But he could play midfield, he could play full back. He did play up front. I think I pushed him up front occasionally, but. Good signing, 40 grand from Watford.
Absolutely,
I mean,
and he was playing on the left wing for Watford, wasn't he? I mean, there's been some of the old footage on ITV recently, and they've shown one or two Watford games from that 84 season, coinciding with your last season at Luton, and he was in the number 11 shirt playing wide left.
Well, Graham liked him big, didn't he? He always liked the big strikers and big forwards.
But he was typical of your signings. You went to that home county circle that you knew so well, the Watford and the Lutons, so he got Jobson, Williams, Bunn, Daniel, Palmer, Parker, Dyer. These are all from those two clubs, Watford and Luton.
Well, I've seen them, and that's what you need to do. If you've seen them and you know the background, then why not? Because, you know, sometimes you see players just a few times. I mean, sometimes it's a little bit of luck. I mean, three or four though, like Ray Daniels, Neil Williams, were free transfers, and they were very, very good players. You know, Ray Daniels never really, for me, fulfilled his real potential because he had tremendous pace and ability, left foot to die for. Where Neil Williams was the opposite. Neil made the most of his you know, because he wasn't so gifted a footballer, but he made it with his enthusiasm and his hard work. You know what you need.
He scored a few vital goals as well.
Very good goals.
As I recall, Neil Williams. He was one of those players who you might not see for half an hour and then he'd score out of the blue.
I would see him because I know what he was doing for the team. You know, but you're right. But supporters. So he wasn't, you know, like Billy Askew or Steve McLaren or Gareth, good footballers, and he was just a grafter that could play right back or right side midfield. So they're important squad members. You know.
We still see him at the KC Stadium now, Neil Williams, working for the Press Association. Billy Whitehurst was also significant that year. That was his big Hull City season. He'd had this sort of couple of years before you arrived of being this sort of raw, non-league striker. And of course, he famously worked non-stop with Chris Chilton to improve himself, and Chris was one of your assistants in that first year. Was it a case, because Chris and Billy have both been on this programme to talk about it, was it a case of kind of leaving them to get on with it? Chris is the expert on strikers, let's let Chris Chilton turn Billy Whitehurst into a goal scorer?
Mate, it was lots of things. You know, Chris did work with him, obviously. He got on great with Dennis also. They used to talk about boxing and things, and but, you know, Chris being as good a striker as he was, of course he did a lot of good work with Billy in the early days. But Billy was better than a lot of people gave him credit for, you know. Not only was he big and strong and put the fear of God into people, he had some ability, you know, and he did love his training. He liked training, he would listen and take it in. And obviously when Newcastle came knocking, we couldn't stand in his way, you know. To come for $2,000 and go for 232 grand.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was incredible.
It was
a good little story about that one before you go on about Don Robinson. Because the manager was McFaul, the old goalkeeper, and he came and he offered me 230 grand. It went up from about 200 to 225 to 230. And Don Robinson came and he said, "Oh, I know the chairman well. I'll get a bit more out of that, Brian. Leave that with me. And Billy's champion at the bit to go to Newcastle, and Don comes back and he said, "I told you I got 232. And I said, "Don, well done, you nearly don't blow the deal for $2,000. But who I've spoken to today, by the way, I mean, I speak to him quite a bit, you know, Don Robinson. I had a great time with him. I learned such a lot.
I'd love to get him on this programme, I really would.
Yeah, well, he made me a director, you know, after that, so
yeah, of course.
I got on great with him. But Billy was a good player, and when he played with Frankie Bunn, they had a spell together when they were almost unplayable at times.
In that first season, that promotion season, it was a partnership, wasn't it? It was Whitehurst 20 goals from 40, and Andy Flounders put away 14 goals that season, which were vital.
Yeah, he was a good goal scorer. And Massey got a few, didn't he?
Well, they're the two that leaped to mind. Massey got 5.
All right.
As did Pete Skipper, funnily enough.
Yeah, set pieces.
And 6 for Billy Askew, but actually there was 11 for Stan McEwen, but of course he took the penalties.
Yeah, I always took the penalties at Brighton at Luton, but I just couldn't get them off Stan because he was such a good penalty taker.
Could you have pulled rank?
I could have pulled rank, but when
was he bigger than you?
I don't know. You wouldn't like me saying that. I see him around now at the KC, but he was a wonderful striker of a ball, Stan. I mean, not only were they good defensively, Skip was good on set pieces coming to get headers, and Stan was tremendous on the penalties and the free kicks, so I just couldn't get on them.
Brian Hortons with us on Sports Call through until 8 o'clock tonight, talking about his 4 years in charge of Hull City in the 1980s. Mike on the line from East Hull. Hello, Mike.
Hiya.
Hiya, Mike. Brian Hortons listening.
Hello, Brian.
Hi, Mike.
I tell you what, that praise at the beginning of the show was just worthy, man. Don't worry about that. But I just wanted to ask you, do you think the atmosphere now has changed to Hull City? You know, like every year, you've been wanting Scale Electric for Christmas, and at the end of the year, you look under the tree and it's a pair of socks. Well, that's what Hull City's been like, isn't it? It's always been a disappointment. But now they've done it. Now you've actually got your Scale Electric. What are you going to do now? What's the goal now?
Well, presumably it's a bigger Scale Electric, isn't it, by staying up? Isn't it, Brian?
Well, I've had a wonderful day today. I've been round the city with the Barclays trophy, the Premiership
the playoff trophy, yeah. Oh, the Premiership trophy.
The Premiership trophy,
yeah.
And so that's my next Scale Electric, trying to get that trophy. It was wonderful round the city today. The atmosphere is still buzzing. You know, I've been in the club today, spoke with the chairman this afternoon about potential targets. Phil's away on holiday at the moment. I'm speaking to him daily, but the atmosphere around the city is wonderful.
It is, yeah. I just find it amazing that a whole city can smile. A whole city.
Mm.
You know,
I know that feeling, Mike.
Anymore.
It sounds like you've got... how many years of supporting have you got behind you, Mike?
Oh, God. 37, something like that.
37 years. That's certainly a lot. That's older than me.
Yeah,
so,
and I finally got my Scale Electric. So now what do I do?
You can never be too old for a Scale Electric. Mike, I love the imagery anyway. But, Mike, thank you very much for the call. It's much appreciated.
OK, thank you. Good luck.
Thanks, thank you.
That's Mike from East Hull on the line. And if you'd like to do likewise, 01482 333 You can text and email as well. I'll give you those details later. That 85-86 season then, Brian, the second season, having been promoted, your squad strengthened a little bit more. Now, finishing sixth and not being far off the promotion, although it was 12 points in the end, but not being far off the promotion push, did that actually exceed your expectations for that year, given that you'd only just come up?
Probably, and I think if I'm right, the playoffs came in the year after that, so we were probably a bit unlucky. You know,
yes, they did, and that was the year that Neil Warnock came up with Scarborough, and there was and they brought in the trapdoor at the same time as the playoffs. Yeah, so it was the last year before the playoffs.
Last year before, but yeah, probably we'd have settled for that, wouldn't we? I think just going up to finish sixth, but it was a slightly disappointing end to the season, wasn't it? Which did us really, but I didn't realise it was 12 points. The gap was that big, but to finish sixth,
to third place it was, yeah.
Yeah, to third place, but you know, to finish that high in the first season after promotion is excellent.
I remember you saying once when you were manager of Huddersfield and I was working there that a cup tie against Wimbledon, and you were saying before the game, look, it's great, fifth round of the FA Cup, but it's not our priority. And then you were 2-1 up with third minute of injury time and Wimbledon equalised, and that's when you said, it wasn't our priority, but when you get so close, you are still entitled to feel disappointed. I suppose there's a contrast there, isn't there?
There is a contrast, but because at that time at Huddersfield, with having the cup games, it cost us because we ended up with Wolves away, Ipswich away, Ipswich, Wolves, and another tough one away from home.
The point is about the expectation, though, isn't it?
The expectation level, but you know, you get a cup runs and you do things and you take them, don't you? So you know, it was a good. It's my second season. Everybody would have taken that without a shadow of a doubt.
What was more remarkable? Sixth in what we now call the Championship, Division 2 as it was. Stan McEwen was your joint top scorer because you'd sold Billy Whitehurst, and he was the penalty taker, a centre back, of course. He ended up with 14 goals, same as Frank Bunn.
Tremendous.
It's remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's good again, because sometimes, you know, you get penalties because you're playing good stuff and getting in the right areas, and sometimes you go through a season where you haven't done enough, and you know, you don't get penalties and stuff. So, as I told you before, Stan was excellent at them, and you know, he very rarely missed. So, you know, and free kicks also. But that is a good tally, that.
Do you remember beating Leeds 2-1 at home that season? Goals from Frankie Bunn and Richard Jobson, and first league game against Leeds United for a little while. And as you know from subsequent victories at Leeds and at home to Leeds, that it's the biggest game of the lot for the supporters.
Yeah, they couldn't do us at all, could they? We produced some really good football, and I saw again the other day where the goals that won it at
Leeds.
At Leeds,
and that was the following year, yeah.
Yeah, and that was, I think it was Parker and Dyer.
That's right.
And Andy Payton on the Leeds one, the one before. Yeah. You know, was it 3-0?
That was 3-1. That was essentially your last victory. That one.
Was it?
Unfortunately, that was the year after. But it was you know, if there was a great way to go, then I suppose beating Leeds United would be one of them. Skipper. and McEwen and Norman, Tony Norman, the great Tony Norman, were key figures. Now, I suppose it's great luck for a manager when you've got the same two centre-backs all season and the same goalkeeper all season, isn't it?
Yeah, and what we were saying earlier on, that, you know, I always, whatever club I was at, if I had good players and they weren't my players, why change that, you know? And I mean, Tony Norman was fantastic. One of the best keepers I've probably ever worked with. Tony Colton was another one at Man City. But Norman was right up there, and he got Welsh international caps during my time here. Skip and Stan were excellent. Full-backs, we swapped around a fair bit. And then, you know, because you always try and get the basis of the team right through the middle, and what we tried to do last season here, and form the basis of the team, you know, with a goalkeeper, two centre-halves, centre midfield player. I think I bought Bobby Dorr to try and replace me, because I'd played a fair bit of the second season, a fair few games, and then obviously Gary Parker was brought in, and then the strikers, Billy, then Frankie Bunn, and so on. And so on, yeah.
The full-backs you mentioned, I mean, you kept those two centre-backs all season. You played Gary Swan a lot.
Yeah, Davies,
at left-back, and Laurie Pearson, but Richard Jobson spent most of that season at, in fact, all that season pretty much at right-back. And it was also that season that you signed Gary Parker, who was, I think, the best outfield player that you had at Hull City. Yeah,
well, I played with Ray Daniels and Gary Parker, who'd come out of the same group of youngsters at Luton whilst I was there. And in fact, I played at Old Trafford with me, Parks and Ray opposite against Moses, Wilkins and Robson one night at Old Trafford. And
how'd you get on?
We lost 3-1, but they did very, very well, because it was one of those where we couldn't do anything in the league, and David played at throwing them in. And ironically, I signed them both. But Parks, I think I did well to get Gary Parker out of Hull for 72 grand, you know. It was a hell of a signing, and I think David just thought he was probably just underneath top level.
Was it hard to persuade Gary Parker to come, given that he'd been in Luton's first team? The year before he'd played in the FA Cup semi-final, he'd been in the England squad at the lower levels, he'd played I think at youth level and been in the under-21s. Was it hard to persuade him to drop down the division?
A little bit, but I think me knowing him and him having, again, respect, and I showed him around the place and told him what the plans were, and the plans were always good, you know. We were always looking to go on. Don let me run the football side, and we were always looking to progress within our means, and persuaded Parks to come, and in the end, and much has been talked about it, you know, the fact that I didn't really have to sell him, you know, and it's a mistake that I did make, because you don't sell your best players unless you have to. But then on the other hand, when they came calling 272 grand, so I'm making 200 grand profit, and I was going to put that 200 grand to what we'd got in the bank and the pre-season tickets, you know, and have a big spend up for the season to come. And unfortunately, I wasn't here to spend that money, but so I couldn't really turn it down for Gary, really, because to go to Forest, who had been in Europe and whatever,
in the way they
you can't sometimes turn it down for the player.
It was a club very designed for the sort of Gary Parker mould of footballer, wasn't it, at that time?
It was, but they stuck him wide on the left, which he didn't particularly like, but then he got goals from there, didn't he?
He got loads.
He was a good player.
He was my hero, and I followed his career after he left Hull City to that extent. And I thought he was outstanding on the left-hand side.
Yeah, he went to Leicester and had a good spell there, and went to Villa.
Yeah.
So he had a good spell, and as I said, you know, you could never look back as a manager, because you have to make decisions, and some are right, some are wrong. But that one, you know,
that's a regret, isn't it?
It was a regret, really, because it maybe would cost me my job, because I think we'd have won games with Gary Parker, and the fact that I was going to have a big spend up after Parks had gone, I probably should have kept him till the summer, then sold him.
86-87 season was a bit different. It became something of you finished 14th, but it was actually only 3 points clear of fourth bottom. It was a lot of teams in a relegation battle towards the end, although I think your situation was coming down the division as opposed to trying to fight your way out of it.
Yeah, I think it was.
Did you feel that was a freak season, or was it a genuine step backwards?
Well, I think what happens, you know, we'd had the promotion, the sixth, and it does go like that, you know, to keep it going, and then that's the time you've got to try and build again, you know, because sometimes you've had your players and they've risen to a certain level, and they can't keep going at that level, you know, and that's when you have to try and rebuild. So it was a season of sort of staying in there and then try and rebuild again. Which
you did. You bought Alex Dyer, you sold Andy Flounders, one or two other new players came in. Charlie Palmer was another one who's been on this programme. Did you feel in fear of your job at any point during that season, given that there was a bit of a slump?
No, never. No, not at all, because I didn't really see it coming, you know. Charlie was a good signing, a good defender, Charlie Palmer. Alex was a tremendous lad to have around, not just on the field. He was just a likeable lad within the dressing room and great talent. Could play up front, could play wide left. 27.5 grand, and why it turned out 27.5 grand, I will never know. Can't remember why, but it was a good signing. I think they sold him for $250,000 in the end.
To Palace, yeah.
To Palace,
just
and
missed out on a cup final with them, yeah.
Yeah, he was a good player. So no, you don't see it coming. I did have a lot of injuries. We're talking about my final season.
No, this is the 86-87
Right.
season when you finished 14th.
Oh no. We'd had a few injuries and stuff, but no, it was more of a rebuilding season, I think,
right.
that one.
Because that was the other thing that's remarkable about that season was the progress in the FA Cup. Got through to the 5th round.
Yeah.
And Wigan, away from home, who were in a division, I think possibly 2 divisions below, but certainly 1 division below. It was a real chance for the quarterfinals, and the draw would have brought up Leeds United as well, and it was an awful day, wasn't it? 3-0 defeat. It was a real chance missed.
But they had some good players. You know, they had Mike Newell, and I think Paul Jewell might have been in that team. They had some good players. Always a hard place to go to. And we were poor on that day, and I took quite a bit of stick that day, you know, because we just never performed. Whether we thought it was going to be too easy, I don't know. We just never performed that day. I tried to sign Mike Newell, funnily enough, after that, and he ended up going to Luton rather than coming here. So, that was one of those days where things happen like that, and you can't always put your finger on it. It was a poor performance.
People pointed to, I think, the substitution of Billy Askew as a key to that game as well. I don't know whether you remember anything about that, but it was 0-0 when you took him off. Yeah,
well, sometimes managers, I've had many conversations and Barney's with David Pleat when he made substitutions.
Of course.
And he said, Brian, sometimes you have to take a chance and you make a decision and it's not done. I like Billy Askew as a player. As a person, he was a fantastic little footballer. I can't remember whether he'd had a little knock or, you know, he might have done, because sometimes it happens again where he might have played with an injury, he had to come off. Sometimes supporters don't see everything. I can't remember taking him off, but for the reason I can't.
Okay, fine. The other two, this was your last full season, of course, 86-87. The other two things that are remarkable from that season, looking back, you tried a lot of youngsters and fringe players. You used quite a lot of players that season. Brentano, Corkane, Neil Buckley got his debut. Yeah. Lee Jenkinson got his debut. Was that out of necessity, or was it the right time anyway?
Well, I think, again, if you remember that season, we started off great. We started off really well, I think, didn't we?
Beat West Brom at home, then beat Millwall away, drew with Oldham, and then there were 3 defeats in a row, but then you got back to it, a great victory at home over Birmingham, and then beat Ipswich and
good teams are playing there, aren't they? You know, I mean, you look at, you're saying Millwall away and West Brom, you know, good teams, and again, towards the end of the season, because we couldn't go down, and that's what I'm saying about selling Gary Parker. It was a mistake to do, but we couldn't go down, and we'd sort of drawn up this plan, myself and Don and the board, to have a big spend up at the end of the season. So I didn't feel under any pressure by putting the kids in, because we couldn't get relegated. And it was just one stupid night against Swindon where we're winning 1-0, and if you got the team there, well, it was absolutely full of kids that night.
Yeah, the very last game certainly was. Yeah, you mentioned. I mean, Jenkinson scored that night. He scored.
We only won none at half time.
Hull City's goal, and it finished 4-1 to Swindon. The other thing from that 87 season was that he gave a debut to Andy Payton, who's still my favourite ever City goal scorer, just because he epitomised to me the man who was completely sort of tunnel-visioned about where the goal was. He was one of those players, one of those great strikers who was about goals and very little else, and I quite like that sort of footballer.
This was tremendous work by Freddie Cowell, who still works for the club now on the youth side with Billy and Manny, and somehow he got Andy Payton out of Burnley, and Burnley had a wonderful youth policy, and we nicked Andy Payton out of Burnley. How he did it, God only knows. And he come in, digs in here. He was a naughty little lad. He would absolutely naughty, horrible. Would slaughter his own players if they didn't pass the ball right to him, if they gave it away. We'd take him off because he'd have a go at the referee, his own players. And Tom Wilson, who was a youth team coach, used to take him off sometimes. He said, we're not having it, and, you know, until you learn, you know, we will keep taking you off. Because it wasn't a bad thing within him, but sometimes it rubbed off badly on the other players. And he was only a youth player. We could see he had the talent and the ability and desire. And that desire sometimes led him into silly situations, and so he had to be taught a lesson, and Tom did teach him a lesson early on.
I think he probably was champing at the bit for his day. I mean, you just made him a sub a couple of times. It wasn't until the following year, your last year, that you finally threw him in and he immediately scored that great goal against Leeds, and we're going to come to that sort of fateful final season next. But just as the last question before we take another breather at this point, when you got to the end of that 87 season and you came into the new year, 87-88, which was your last year, you didn't quite finish it, had you been told it's time to improve things, it's time to really make a push? Were you told at any point by Don Robinson, this is going to be the year?
We wanted it to be every year. Don was impatient like me, and we wanted to be every year, but football's not like that. And it is. We were in the Championship. And we hadn't spent fortunes. We were playing some top sides, and we were beating some top sides. And no, he hadn't put him in. And Don let me get on with the football all the time I was here. He was a fantastic chairman to work with. He just had a silly night against Swindon because I said to you, the club was in very good hands, not just with me, with the other coaches and the people that were working behind the scenes. They were wonderful people to work with. And for me, you don't react like that on one result. I couldn't see it coming. Dennis, Tom, Jeff Ratcliffe, the physio, all my staff, none of them. They all threatened to resign that night with me and everything. You know, I mean, the players had a little revolt and went to the chairman, and chairman came down and asked me would I reconsider. You know, he just sat me. The players had to go at him, and I mean, you can't. Once he's sacked, you can't come back.
No. Well, I mean, I'm going to ask you about that in the last section about how you actually felt at that point. We've got a couple of texts. Brian Horton is a living legend. I just love the man. Thanks for all you've done for the Tigers, says Stephen Bruff. And when you get texts like that, it makes it all worthwhile, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, it does. And you know, there's not many clubs I would have come back to be number 2. I don't know, and that's not, you know, being blasé or being stupid. It's a fact, but you're just reading it out there, and it takes me back, and I have great affinity with the place and the people, and you know, and I'm just as pleased for the supporters because they've never ever been there, and now we're giving them a chance of having a taste of the Premier League. Just
as a final thought, just before we do take this breather, it's just occurred to me, of course, that we haven't really mentioned much about you playing for Hull City, which of course you did for those first sort of 2.5 years, but that 86-87 season, your last full season, was also your last season as a player. You made your last appearance in the number 7 shirt. You substituted yourself, assuming that you were in charge of the substitutions that day, in a 4-0 away defeat at Plymouth. It wasn't a great way to end. What finally made you decide, I'm not going to play again?
Well, when did we play Palace? Because I thought, did we play Palace in one of my latter games?
Horton B, let's have a look. You played Birmingham, Leeds and Ipswich 3 in a row, won 2 of them. You played in those, and you played Grimsby Town and then away at Crystal Palace, and you played one more at Plymouth on January the 3rd, 1987, and that was your last game.
Well, I think I got sent off at Palace, and Mark Bright had split my eye, and I should have come off, and I wouldn't come off. And again, a silly situation because that's the way I was as a player. So Jeff Ratcliffe patched me up because I was insisted that I was going to be patched up, and I had to get my revenge on Mark Bright before I
Is that what you did?
Came off. That's what I did, and I went in the dressing room. I got sent off. Red card.
3-match ban.
3-match ban.
And
I
then
think.
you brought yourself straight back then if it was a 3-match ban, and then at Plymouth, and that was your last game.
Well, I probably realised then, you know, maybe it was time to come out, but you know, and Don Robinson came down to the dressing room, and I said, Don, you know, I'm thinking of packing in playing, and he didn't want me to, and some of the players didn't want me to. Dennis didn't want me to, but I thought the time had come then to concentrate just on managing.
Okay, fair enough. That 87-88 season, then, Brian, one that you didn't quite get to finish, and yet up to Christmas, everything was as rosy as it had ever been.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good, and we thought it might be our year, you know, and for some reason, I know the reason, we got lots of injuries, and I think, as we said earlier, we started to put some of the kids in because the squad, you know, wasn't that big, and then it took its toll a little bit, you know.
Yeah, you lost one or two. You certainly lost Billy Askew to an injury at a crucial point in that season. You started the season without Neil Williams, and you sold Frankie Bunn. I remember you selling Frankie Bunn in the November of that season. I think he went to Oldham, didn't he, where he famously scored all those goals in that League Cup tie against Scarborough. Was it just the right time, or was the offer too good?
Yeah, it had a little problem, you know, off the park at that time,
right,
which we didn't really talk about too much at that time. So, you know, Frankie just wanted to leave all at that particular time.
Look, I mean, okay. On the pitch, I mean, I remember when you signed Peter Barnes that season, and like, blimey, and he'd only been out the England squad for something like 5 years. He wasn't quite 30. We thought, blimey, he's got Peter Barnes, albeit only until the end of the season. Maybe it'll go on for a bit longer. That didn't work, though, did it?
His first game,
yes,
I can't remember who it was against, but he was absolutely fantastic.
It was a 2-1 home defeat to Barnsley, and then after that, you played him every single game for the rest of that season.
I see him at Man City now because he does the corporate there at Man City, and he said, "I'll get you the sack." His debut was absolutely fantastic.
Indeed, I remember it well because that's everyone thought that this could rescue our season.
It could rescue me because I know. I mean, they say that the supporters were getting restless. It's very few because I think they saw what we're trying to do in the end, and I'd made it public that I was putting some of the kids in to test them and see whether they could, be a part of our future. Couldn't get relegated, so it was just daft. A few supporters reacted against Swindon, which wasn't many. A few at the end of the season, at the end of the game, had a pop at me and then a pop at Don, and Don reacted before he could tell the other directors or some of his pals that used to come with him that he'd sacked me when I came off the pitch, which is something you don't really do. I think he regrets it to this day, where he should have gone home, thought about it, and if he wanted to do it, then he'd do it next day. But to react as quickly as he did as we come off the field, to pull me in my office and tell me, well, he didn't have to tell me because I knew. And then, funny enough, I'd said to Dennis Booth before the game, because we'd lost at Bradford just before that, where not words, but you can tell. I'm old enough and wise enough to tell even at that time that things weren't quite right. And when he came in to tell me, I knew what was coming.
It was a 14-game run. I mean, in order to try and sound more balanced than I am, because I'm completely on your side over this, managers have gone for shorter or runs without a victory than that.
But at that time we were still in the process of being, in the so-called Championship, the First Division. We were still at a good standard. We weren't going down. We weren't getting relegated. People could still see that what we were doing off the field. So Alex Ferguson could have gone.
Absolutely,
the director saw what he was doing behind the scenes, and the behind the scenes was still very, very good. When I went after the Swindon one, we played Huddersfield at home. I actually spoke to Malcolm MacDonald, who just had the sack at Huddersfield, and it was Dennis was put in charge, and it was absolute. I should have had a bet on the game, shouldn't I? Because I was taking. I went with my wife and the kids up to the lakes to get away from football, and we just put the scores on. Hull 4, Huddersfield 0, and it was an absolute knocking bet. I'd have put my house on it that they beat them that day. Because we hadn't been playing that badly. I know it's an old thing to say, but sometimes that happens where players get a release because the manager's gone. But it wasn't the fact that me and the players weren't getting on, because when Don sacked me, about half a dozen of them had a deputation. Well, they had a right pop at Don in the dressing room.
That's the thing that intrigues me about it the most, is this players' revolt. Yeah. And Gareth Roberts has been on and talked about it. Peter Skipper, Richard Jobson, Charlie Palmer, they've all talked about it. Yeah. And I love this idea of guys in their, still sort of covered in mud in their kit, stamping along to see Don Robinson saying, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" And Don Robinson reacting to it.
He reacted because I said, "Do you want to go and tell the boys or shall I?" He said, "No, I'll go and tell them." So, I rang my wife, my wife was upstairs watching the game. I rang my parents and told them I'd gone. Told them, my brothers told them I'd gone before. It wasn't as fast as it is now, obviously, with the teletext and whatever. And he said, "No, I'll go and tell him." And he went down to the dressing room and he said, "Brian's gone." And they asked, "Well, Brian's gone. What, resign? You've sacked him?" But I did tell Dennis before the game, I was going to say I said to Dennis, "If we lose tonight, I think I might have a problem." He said, "No way will he ever." He said, "You're like one of his sons." He said, you're almost unsackable. And that's the way a lot of people thought. But anyway, the players had a pop. He came back to my to the office and said, "Brian, they've just had a right go. Would you reconsider if I'm going away on business?" And
did you, for a moment, think about saying yes, all right, I'll come back?
Not one single second.
No regrets about that?
You can't have regrets because, and I said the fact to him, so we'll lose again next week, you sack me again and I'll come back again. You can't be like that. And then he went upstairs and told the directors, he said it was the worst decision ever made in his whole life, in his career. And it was a shame because we got on really, really well. But I said to him, "Don, for me, the time has come as well," because I could feel the sense.
But there were only 4 games to go. You weren't going to go down.
And I think we got about £750,000 in the bank. to spend, which was a lot of money.
Some of which had come from selling Gary Parker about 3 weeks before. He scored, I remember it well, he scored a brilliant free kick against Plymouth, and you sold him the next day.
Yeah.
Because I remember it being announced on Sports Night or something in the evening. He'd gone to Nottingham Forest, and you've already said that you regretted that, but...
the other part of the regret of that deal is that I'd set it off because I tried to get a player from Notts Forest.
Who was that?
It was a fullback called Brett Williams.
Yes, who was Stuart Pearce's long-time deputy at left back, never got a game.
And so I triggered it off, and they said to me, well, 200 grand plus Parker.
Did you know that they'd been watching Parker, or did...
Well, we get the lists of who's coming, and they'd watched him quite a lot play on the left-hand side when I'd played him on the left-hand side, and that's where Ronnie Fenton, who did a lot of signing for Brian Clough, had seen him. So I triggered that off, and then Brett wouldn't come. I spoke to Brett. I drove Gary Parker down to the City Ground to speak to Cloughie and Ronnie Fenton. And
is it right that you advised Gary Parker, or somebody advised Gary Parker to have a haircut before he met Brian Clough?
Fenton.
Yeah.
And he had a little trim like yours. He had, still very long, and he had about half-inch off. And I said, well, where are you going? Because I wouldn't tell him at the night where he was going. I picked him up next morning and said, well, you're going to Notts Forest, and he will not have that haircut. You'll have to have it. And Brian wasn't actually at the talks, and Ronnie Fenton said to him. So the deal was done, but Brett Williams chose not to come, so it ended up he gave me the 270 odd rather than 200 plus Williams.
You signed that season Keith Edwards and Wayne Jacobs as well, and barely got a chance to watch them play for you. And I mean, the two greatly significant signings, Keith Edwards in the short term with the amount of goals he scored the following year for Eddie Gray, and Wayne Jacobs, still my favourite ever left back in a Hull City shirt, who went on to be a terrific left back until injury got him, and he was sort of rather callously treated by the club in the end. But you never got the chance, really, did you? And
no.
they were almost your last act as manager.
Well, Keith was always going to score goals, and again, good signing, which he proved to be for the following season. Wayne, I've seen at Bradford. Actually, a couple of
never left Yorkshire.
No,
all his career, never left Yorkshire. Started at Sheffield Wednesday, Hull City, Rotherham, Bradford.
He said I'd never had a chance to play for him, but he was a good little full-back, Wayne, and yeah, it's a shame because there you go again. I was allowed to make these signings for the following season, and then didn't quite get there.
No, you beat Leeds twice that season, which was a genuine highlight. The 2-0 you've alluded to, the one at Ellen Road with that great sort of twist and turn by Alex Dyer that seemed to take forever to go in, and then Gary Parker scoring the second. But the home game, which actually turned out to be your last victory before that winless run started, when you put Andy Payton in for his full start, and he immediately scored after 2 minutes, and then Richard Jobson scored that left-footed volley that seemed to take forever to go in after the ball had stayed in the penalty area for half an hour, it felt like.
That's right.
That was an amazing game. That was a great day.
It was a packed house, and to beat Leeds, because they'd obviously been, the big club, hadn't they, in Yorkshire, and to keep turning them over as we did was always great, and to see Boothferry Park full. But again, you're talking about some good players there. The one Andy Payton, Richard Jobson,
Alex Dyer, Gary
Parker. So some good players. I reflect on it many times. And people still mention it now. One today said, I really enjoyed your side, and I mean they've enjoyed last season without a doubt. And it's fantastic to go and play in the Premier League now. But there's some great moments with some of those players.
Can I just ask one last thing about the 87-88 season? Do you think the fact that you had to play Watford 3 times in the FA Cup and then still went out affected... Because it's in January in the third round, and that's when the run of not winning...
Yeah.
It wasn't all defeats, there were a few draws, obviously, but the winless run started. You got a 1-1 draw at Watford, 2-2 at Boothferry Park, having been 2-0 up, and being given a doozy of a penalty against you, which I still is convinced was the worst penalty decision I've ever seen, and then lost the third. Do you think that had an effect?
Well, it's like I was saying before, Huddersfield, the cup runs, and it can, and Watford then were a first division side, I think. We were second, and they were first. So to draw, and then lose, wasn't bad, but it can be costly, and that's it doesn't happen now. But great memories, and we could talk all night, couldn't we?
Absolutely.
But,
we've got about 30 seconds left. Very briefly, did you watch the decline of the club with sorrow? Because the next 10 years were dreadful.
Absolutely, of course you do, and it's just happened with Port Vale now. That have gone to the bottom division. Of course I do, because I had 4.5 wonderful years here.
And lastly, very briefly, assistant manager in the Premier League, about to be at the same club where it all began. It's a funny old life, isn't it, Brian?
It's a
Like
funny
Brian.
old game, and no one laughs. Okay, that's what no one laughs all the time, do they? But I'm looking forward to it. Back in the Premier League, brilliant.
I've thoroughly enjoyed this. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
And we'll see you again, no doubt, before the start of the season. Brian Horton with us on Sports Call for this Friday evening. Enjoy your weekend. Super League live tomorrow night and on Sunday as well. Rovers Wakefield tomorrow night, and on Sunday, Hull FC are at Bradford.